Hi, I'm Jeremy Zunert, coming to you live from my backyard in Los Angeles, California. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy, healthy, and having fun. Today in Critter Chat, we're going to talk about an amazing species of bird that I think is one of the coolest looking birds on the planet. And they have some really amazing behaviors and features. Today, we're going to talk about secretary birds. For starters, secretary birds are a raptor, or they're in the group of birds we call the birds of prey. That means they are hunters, they are meat eaters, and they are capable of killing their own food. To be a raptor, they kind of have three things: really good vision, curved, very sharp beak, and very sharp talons or claws on their feet. Other birds of prey would be things like hawks, falcons, eagles, and secretary birds are definitely, although they look a little different than those birds, they do qualify as a bird of prey. They were first described by Europeans in 1779, and the scientist who was describing them scientifically thought that they looked quite a bit like the secretaries back at his home in England. Secretaries at that time were men, and they wore short knee-length pants. They had long coats with gray tails, and they also used pens that were made of goose feathers or goose quills, and they would often tuck those behind their ear, so a feather sticking out of the side of their hat or off the side of their head. And the scientist who was describing the secretary birds thought that these birds looked remarkably similar to the secretaries who worked in offices back in London, with their long gray tail feathers and their dark feathered top half of their legs, the end kind of midway down, where their legs then become kind of more scaly. And then they have these beautiful crest of feathers that stick out on the back of their head, like the quills or the pens that the secretaries at the time used. So they are distantly related to other birds of prey, including goshawks and sparrowhawks. Those are birds specifically adapted to hunting other birds. But they are uniquely in a family of their own. They don't have a close living relative. And they're pretty good size. So their standing height is about 4 feet up to about 4'9", with nearly a 7-foot wingspan. So they have pretty big wings. We've talked about wingspan before. Usually for humans, the length of your arms, if you extend them all the way out from one hand to the other hand, is roughly equivalent to your height. Mine is about 6 feet. I'm just 6'1" in height. So secretary birds have another foot of wings beyond what my arms can reach. So they have a pretty great wingspan, but they have really light weight. They only weigh between 5 and up to almost 10 pounds. So they're pretty lightweight, which is good because they're a good size height-wise and have pretty big wings, but that makes them able to fly fairly well. They live in Africa, south of the Sahara Desert, pretty much from the west coast of Africa to the east coast of Africa, and all the way down to the southern tip, with two big exceptions. They don't live in the rainforest or any heavy forested areas, and they also don't live in the really hot, dry deserts of southwestern Africa, the Kalahari Desert, or the Namibia Desert also. They generally prefer areas that are open grasslands with a few trees here and there. And that is because of the way that they hunt. It's pretty remarkable the way they hunt. They spend most of their day walking. And they've monitored how far secretary birds walk in a day. And it's between 15 and 20 miles on an average. So it's quite a bit of walking in a day. and they walk through the grass, whether the grass is tall, short, medium length, green, yellow, brown, dry grass. They will spend a lot of time walking through the grass. They will sometimes shake their feet as they walk in the grass to scare out anything that might be hiding in some of the grass. They'll kind of kick some little bushes from time to time to also scare out things that may be hiding in there. So while they're hunting and looking for food, they will eat just about anything that they can. Anything that's small enough for them to attack and kill, they're going to try to eat. But their scientific name, that's the name they're known globally by, is called Sagittarius serpentarius. And those are, I believe they're Greek words that mean archer of snakes. They are experts at killing snakes. They will go after some poisonous snakes and some of the, venomous snakes. Poisonous is if you eat it and you get sick, that's poisonous. Venomous is if it bites you and you get sick or die, then it's venomous. So they're venomous snakes. But venomous snakes in Africa can be things like cobras. There's another very venomous snake called a puff adder. And secretary birds have no problem eating those snakes. They typically will do so by stomping on it with their strong legs and very sharp talons on their feet. They're able to usually kill the snake pretty quick. They step right behind its head super fast. They have a lot of strength in their leg, and that usually can crush the back of the snake's spine, right where it attaches to its head, and it usually kills it, or at least stuns it pretty good, and then they swallow it. They're pretty efficient hunters. In addition to snakes, they'll go after other reptiles, including lizards and small tortoises. They'll also eat other birds, bird eggs, rodents, hares, or like rabbits, and insects, spiders, scorpions, millipedes. They'll eat kind of anything that is on the ground scurrying about. But their specialty is snakes. But if they see something else, they'll eat it as well. If the other thing that they're going after tries to run from them, they have pretty good ability to run after it. And they will often flare their wings out and flare their feathers up on their head to be even more intimidating and to kind of chase whatever they're hunting down. And when they do so, the feathers on their head stand up really tall, and they're pretty menacing looking, very scary looking, very intimidating to other things while they're hunting. Now there is an animal that they think was closely related to a secretary bird, but it is extinct. It lived during the Ice Age here in America, actually here in Los Angeles. They found them in the La Brea tar pits, and they are called Daggett's eagles. They called them an eagle. They're not really an eagle. They're closer related to a secretary bird, although those are kind of cousins of eagles, so it all works out. But those also had very long legs, presumably feathers upon the back of their head that would stand up, and they would also hunt in tall grassland areas that were in Southern California at the time of the last ice age. When the secretary bird kills its food, it usually eats its food right away, sometimes swallowing it whole. They don't have teeth, no birds do, so it swallows its prey pretty quickly. Secretary birds have a really amazing courtship ritual when it comes time to find a mate and to begin the process of breeding. They do a very specialized dance on the ground that is similar to cranes. Cranes are known for their elaborate courtship dances. Secretary birds also do courtship in the air with flying. They do an elaborate flight pattern where if one bird is flying and the other one's on the ground, the one flying will start to dive down towards the other bird and turn really quick before it hits the ground, and then zoom back up. So it's kind of making big loops in the sky. And then if the second bird joins the first, they will continue to do this big looping flight routine. I'll see if I can find a video of it and post it later. It's very impressive, super, super cool. It is believed that they are monogamous. So once they find a mate, they're usually paired with that bird for the rest of their lives. And they will build a pretty crazy nest. They typically will find a tree that's near their preferred grassland habitat, and they'll start to gather sticks from either that tree, other nearby trees, sticks that are off of a dead tree or in the river that get washed down. And they'll gather these sticks over several months, and they start to lay them out in a big stick nest on top of a tree. It usually kind of stunts the growth of the tree. Sometimes it weighs enough that it will kill the tree. This is not uncommon to other types of birds. Bald eagles are notorious for doing the same thing and building nests out of big sticks. Secretary bird nests can measure about 8 feet across, which is also similar to bald eagle nest. The largest bald eagle nest weighed over 2,000 pounds. I don't know if a secretary bird nest has ever gotten that heavy, but it certainly could, because they do start to build more sticks year after year. They'll come back to the same nest site and continue to use that. Once the female lays her eggs, they're usually 2 to 3 pale green eggs. They're good sized, bigger than a chicken egg. She'll lay a new egg every like 2 or 3 days till there's 2 or 3 eggs. And then she'll do most of the incubation. He'll do some of it, but he'll kind of sit on the eggs for a bit and let her go grab some food. And then she'll come back, she'll kick him off the nest, she'll sit on the eggs, and he'll go eat again. Typically their day-to-day life is they wake up about when the sun comes up. They spend most of their day out walking, looking for food, and then they come back to their nest tree to roost or to sleep during the nighttime. They'll often do that and stay together even when it's not the season for breeding or raising their chicks. But once they have eggs on the nest, she usually stays at the nest site or really close by, incubating the eggs for between 42 to 46 days. And then once the eggs hatch, a parent will always stay with the chicks. Because their nest is at the top of the tree, it's very exposed, very open to, 1, the elements, so the weather, and 2, other potential predators. Those would be other birds of prey will sometimes go after secretary bird chicks because it's a source of food. There's no like, I'm gonna get that secretary bird back. It's not like that. They're just hungry, looking for food. So usually the mom sticks around for the first little bit, but then they start to take turns, and the dad will stay with the chicks up until about they're 3 weeks old, and then they'll start to maybe leave them alone a little bit more. During that time, the parents will bring back food and regurgitate it or vomit it up for the babies to eat. At about 3 weeks old, the babies start to develop some of those head feathers and get to look a little bit more like a secretary bird, with full feathers coming in around 6 weeks old. At about 40 days old, so a little over a month, or about a month and a half, the parents will start to bring chunks of food home, and sometimes whole food if it's small enough. So if they catch like a mouse or a little snake, a little lizard, they'll bring that back to the nest and just fly over the nest and drop it down for the babies to start to experiment with pulling apart food and learning how to eat it. Once the babies are about 3 months old, they fledge, which means that they take their first flight. Depending on how high of a tree the nest is, that flight is sometimes good. That flight is sometimes more like a controlled fall or an attempt to control the fall. And then when they get down to the ground, they still don't really know how to fly. And if it's a high nest, they may have a hard time getting back to it. So the parents will then start to teach these growing chicks how to hunt, how to kick to kill their food, and also how to fly. Now, when a secretary bird is an adult, it's tall enough and awkward enough that it can't just like flap its wings and be flying. It actually has to do kind of a runway landing and takeoff. So it has to kind of run along the ground, flapping its wings as it goes before it gets up into the air. And then when it lands, if it lands on its nest, it can kind of come up real slow from lower and land on its nest. But if it's landing on the ground, it usually comes in pretty quick and has to run for a little bit as it lands. And they have to teach the chicks how to be able to do that so that they can be successful when they're adults. Secretary birds are one of the few birds of prey, other than owls, that can usually have more than one baby in a season. Typically with like eagles or hawks or some of the other birds, if they have multiple babies, they don't always all survive. Usually just the biggest, strongest survives, even if multiples hatch. But secretary birds are pretty great at being good parents and raising their babies up to where they can be fully survived chicks. Once they're out on their own and the parents kind of teach them how to walk through the grass and hunt, within a week or two of their first flight, they're like, okay, see you, mom and dad, thanks for a great life, and they're out. And then living on their own. But it's unsure really where they go, what they do before they may pair up and start a family of their own. It's estimated that it's at least 2 years before that happens, but it could be a little sooner. We're still learning. Secretary birds can usually live into their teens, out in the wild, and into their 20s in captivity or under human care, because they're not having to hunt their own food. They don't have competition. They don't have, if they get sick or injured, they get a veterinary care. So all those good things. Secretary birds are listed as vulnerable to extinction. In 1968, they actually became protected under the African Convention on the Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources. So this is a group of African countries that said, hey, let's protect this species. This one seems like it could use some of our help. And so they all signed into agreement that secretary birds were something that they would try to protect. That's probably a really good thing. There used to be some hunting for their feathers because they have some really cool feathers on their head. They were hunted for that for a bit, but that stopped in the 1960s, thank goodness. Some of their threats today still include habitat loss, mostly for things like agriculture. Sometimes if it's an open grassland, they'll burn the grass off and then chop down any trees that are nearby and plant crops in that area. Sometimes they flood valleys to build a dam to save water, and both those things can have negative impacts on secretary birds. And luckily, there are a good number of secretary birds that live in protected areas like national parks and preserves. Throughout their huge range, they do live over a large portion of Africa. As always, I like to talk a little bit about my experiences with the animals I feature on Critter Chat. The first time I saw a secretary bird was at the Honolulu Zoo in Honolulu, Hawaii. I was visiting the zoo, and it was in an exhibit that included some other African antelope. And I was looking at the antelope, and all of a sudden behind this bush came this striking bird that was really quite tall and very gorgeous. And I had no idea what it was. I had never seen it. I had never heard of them. But I was absolutely amazed by it, the way that it walked, its beauty, and it was super captivating to watch. I then spent some time learning more about secretary birds. And when I went to Kenya in 2010, I was able to see secretary birds in the wild. The photos I posted earlier today on Facebook and Instagram are from my trip to Kenya. I do have some other photos that I found after I posted those that show a secretary bird up on its nest, so I hopefully will be able to post that later today to share with you. It was really cool to watch them. We saw a breeding pair. We saw them doing their courtship flights. So we saw them flying in their loops with each other. We saw them do a runway takeoff and runway landing. We saw them defending their nest and protecting their nest. It was believed that they had eggs up there. It was about a 20-foot tall tree. We did not climb up the tree to see if there were eggs, but it was presumed that there would be eggs up there. The people, our guide who was driving us around the conservancy where we were staying, said that pair had been there for, I think, 4 or 5 years, and they had successfully raised chicks 2 years ago, but when I was there, the last years did not successfully survive. So it is something that happens in nature where sometimes good parents still struggle to make things successful. But it was super cool to see the secretary birds. We also saw them out hunting another day, walking through the grass, looking for food. So it was super great to be able to see them out in their natural habitat. I since have seen them at a couple of different zoos. Most recently, the San Diego Zoo has them in their Elephant Odyssey exhibit that explores animals related to animals that they found in the La Brea tar pits. Super cool to see them up close. You get pretty close to them at San Diego Zoo. And they are certainly one of my favorite birds to watch and to learn about. They are a bit rare in US zoos. They've had a hard time breeding them, with San Diego Zoo's Safari Park being one of only 2 zoos in the US that has successfully bred them in a zoo setting. So it's still a lot that we're learning, and hopefully that learning will continue and we can continue to help them out as they are vulnerable to extinction. As always, I'll be posting more information about secretary birds up on my social media platforms, most likely Facebook today, maybe some photos on Instagram, and this critter chat will be uploaded to Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and as well to my website at jeremythezoonerd.com. So feel free to check that out. And as always, like, follow, subscribe, and share any of my content across any of my platforms with family, friends, and anyone you know who might be interested in learning more about animals. Until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, be safe. Take care. See you tomorrow. Bye.